Okay. Professor Liam, do you need more time? We can give you more time. We can play a song. Okay. Sounds good. Let me block and mute this person first. And then we can move on. Guys, it has been quite a ride. I enjoyed every second of it. It was very educational for me. There are a lot of information that I didn't know. So now we are down to our last topic, right?
But questions first,
Okay.
I think, right?
Yes, yes. So guys, before we move on to our last topic, do you have any questions? If you want to get on the panel, so just raise your hand and then request. Otherwise, you can type in your question in the comments. And I believe I'm 100% sure that Salah has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Let me get with the question
Dish,
from.
go ahead. If you will have a question first, go ahead and say it.
It's from Matthew Shlomo. He's saying, during the Second Temple, is it still fair to call them Israelites?
Technically, no. I mean, at that point, it's easier to think of them as Judeans in English, or as Jews, because you're dealing with like the Persian satrapy of Judah. So, I mean, not really. But the concept of Israelite is really, it exists at this point, and what happens in terms of like the long-term after-the-fact use is that, remember again, the myth of the United Monarchy does make them all Israelites, but it's wasn't really what it was before. You can use it, but it's not good practice historically to do it that way. It doesn't make sense. People just do it for theological reasons, because if you again take seriously the myth of the United Monarchy, and then Judah has that entire territory, now it controls the whole hill country and the Galil, kind of. But I would only do it in that religious context.
Even when we're talking about the Samaritans?
Well, the political identity...
Because the Samaritans didn't mix, and they stayed on their side, and they, until today, call themselves Israelites.
Well, but at that point, again, so that from a theological context, it makes sense. And both populations call themselves Israelites from a theological context. But Yisrael ceases to exist when the Assyrians take it out. So at that point, we should call them Samaritans, because that's the name for the culture that survives in the area. So it's how we can properly identify the historical shifts, is like the terms that we'll tend to use. So in theological terms, sure. In historical terms, after the fall to the Assyrians, I would use Samaritan as the term. And no, somebody's asking if Samaritans are an imported group. No, the Samaritans are literally the descendants of the ancient Israelite kingdom. And again, this is why genetically they're Palestinian too. They've always been there. They're Canaanites, but their culture, their religion, it's all indigenous. But it's changed too. It's a more complicated story in some ways, especially since it's a smaller population, and they stay in large numbers for quite a long time. They're still revolting against the Romans in the 5th fucking century, but they keep losing over and over and over, and their population goes down and more people get assimilated. So they become Hellenists, they become Christians, which is why the long-term conversion of somebody into Christianity is why they become Palestinians over time and lose that original cultural distinction. Their population shrinks steadily over a long period of time. But I think, from the period we were just talking about on, it makes a lot more sense just to call them Samaritan, because that's the culture that we're talking about, and Yisrael no longer exists as a political entity.
My question is, you at the end you described that basically to understand the 3 monotheistic religions, you have to understand the 5 monotheistic religions, more or less. But like in a way or another, you dropped another one, which is considered to be the oldest monotheistic religion, which is the Sabians.
So it didn't include them in it.
Because Abraham is believed to be a Sabian.
Again, that's honestly mythological. It's not an actual thing. With the Sabian references are actually a long-term historical misunderstanding of the original South Arabian kingdom, and they aren't they weren't monotheistic. They are
They were
ultimately
actually
connected.
until today. They exist and they are monotheistic.
There is a group today, but I'm talking about in this period. It isn't something there. That doesn't fit there. There are changes and transformations in those cultures over time and ways that bring it into it. But at the time we're talking about, they're not actually a distinct monotheistic faith. There are other groups that distinct monotheistic faith. There are other groups that.
Oh, somebody has a Mike. You have
It's
an
okay.
echo.
I pulled him up without him knowing that I pulled him up, so I understand that. I just
No
muted
worries.
him. I just, guys, want to recognize these two amazing people, and I'm sorry to cut you off since we stopped. These amazing people have been here from the start, and Bella Love is the one who could put us in contact with Professor Liam. This session wouldn't happen if it wasn't for her. So I really appreciate both of you, and I'm sorry to cut you off, guys. You can go on.
Go ahead. Yeah. That's the thing. I mean, I did some readings on the Sabians, and I understood that they have always kept, like, they have even recognized the same first, I think, 6 or 7 known prophets of the monotheistic religions, and that's why basically, like, Adam and Eve, they have the same story. They have the Noah and the ark and of Noah and all of that. So basically, I don't know if that has developed later on by their effect of different religions, or they have started with it.
Yeah, no, it is. So this is where, again, and this is where I started with a big disclaimer about the religious or theological understandings and then the historical ones, right?
Yeah.
Because looking at Quran, there is a distinct group of Sabians, but there's no clear consensus on which one he could have meant or was thinking about, because there's nothing that actually fits that description. One common argument, and I think the thing that's clearest for me, so like the way that I would put this is, it actually is a squishing together of two distinct things. The culture, the original state in South Arabia, that was distinct from the other Arabs that we know of today as Arabs, right? Because in the Arabian Peninsula, there were no previous histories of state structures, formal agriculture, monolithic architecture, things like that, except in that corner of Yemen where there's enough rainfall for agriculture. But that state fell before the rise of Islam. And because it fell before that, there's a connection there name-wise. But the other group that's most commonly referenced, and what I think Muhammad means by that in Quran, is the Mandeans. And the Mandeans are a Gnostic faith descended from John the Baptist. And they literally still exist. There's not very many of them. I don't know, 30, 40,000, something like that.
70,000.
Okay, cool. Then at least the numbers are going up. I'm worried about it eventually collapsing because somebody had been driven into exile. But the Mandeans are a Gnostic religion that have their origins in the 1st century. They're not an ancient people. They don't exist at the time that we're talking about. So if that's the group you're talking about, that's likely what he meant. But it's not a name that they used at the time either. So I think it's what it comes down to us in terms of the understanding is actually Quranic. It comes from that, and it's a squishing together of different concepts, to create a distinct people, and another one of the Ahl Kitab. But with this one, it's including the Mandean faith descended from John the Baptist. Originally, there were a whole bunch of different religions that arose around the 1st century as apocalyptic movements inside Judaism. The two main ones that have survived to the present are Christianity and Mandeism, and Mandeism is tiny. Most of the other ones all go extinct, but there's actually quite a lot of them. Just as a fun point, okay, so one of the first things that got me into this topic, that drew me into this, my family, to get a quote unquote better education or whatever from where we were growing up and how shitty the school system was, I went through 12 years of Catholic school. So that was fun. But that got me really interested in the history of Christianity and the Romans and all the rest of the stuff. So there's 7 shelves on Christian origins here. And facing me on this section over here, there are 7 shelves on Greek and Roman history. That was my introduction to this as a topic. It was the origins of Christianity. And that took me down rabbit holes studying the origins of Islam and the origins of Judaism and everything else. And I just went deeper and deeper and deeper into the shit. But the first thing that got me interested as a kid was all these Jesus stories and where does this come from and how did this develop? So it's a long, lifelong interest. But yeah, there were a ton of apocalyptic religions. Only 2 survived to the present. And one of them has an afterlife in the Quran. And it comes to be understood differently because of the rise of Islam and those areas being conquered by and folded into the Arab empires, and that has shifted their understanding of themselves over time. But their origins are as a first century cult in Judaism. So that's where I would put them. So they don't exist yet.
Okay. Fair enough.
Okay, so were there
Guys, any more questions in the chat?
other thoughts? Because we went through like the Assyrians, Chaldeans, Persians, created Judah, like any other thoughts or whatever?
I think people are tired.
There's still 140 people, so that's not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
guys, if
good.
you have any question, raise your hand in the comments. Raise your hand, go once, going twice, and sold to the next
Ala
topic.
una, ala dua, ala tresa.
Okay. I've been figuring out how to make this a little easier and flow for myself, so I started.
Wow, look at this. We have a chat.
Guys,
Tired? Never.
We don't have a question, we have a
In
compliment.
the comments.
Which-
Tired?
Yes, I
Never.
wish I had the
Oh,
fresh
yeah,
and
right.
energy.
Cool.
Somebody asked about Cain's wife. Yeah, I didn't get into like the way a lot of the other Genesis stories could be understood and what they're trying to do. There's a lot of really important etiological myths around that. Cain wasn't a historical figure. The Cain story is actually vitally important in the development of the religion, but has been understood in terms of like what it's contributing in terms of the ideas, the mythology, what people are supposed to believe and do. So I didn't get into it. If somebody wants, we can do that, but we're way past it chronologically now. But anyone's interested, we can talk about it. I started figuring out a way to at least get this clearer chronologically, so I started doing like little like one word notes to myself to put them in order. So I'm gonna go through this now. So when I get from here to here, I'll shut up. You'll be done with me for a while. And then we'll see, you guys can tackle early Christianity some other way here. I mean, I love talking about that stuff, but it'll be fun to like you see other people like talk about it and, approach it their ways and see how it goes. That's kind of cool. I like that you guys are at least spreading the labor around. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, you're also welcome to join in the panel when we are talking about it. So you can chip in whenever we are, whenever anybody who's going to be talking about it is lacking for some information or something as well.
I mean, on some level, I wouldn't mind. On another level, I feel like, I don't know. I don't want to make it look like I'm trying to like, intrude, step on people's toes, contradict them or whatever. I don't know. It's really up to you guys. I mean, because I have some reservations about doing it and making it seem like it's.
I mean, you can add questions and stuff like that, basically, because I will be talking next time in a week. So I'm sitting here and giving questions because this is basically very interesting and gets the people to get more into details as well. Yeah. So it's really cool.
Freedom.
Yeah.
Be blessed would like to
Dr.
come up.
I'm sorry?
Can you swap me with Be Blessed? She has a question. Can we let her?
Okay, got you.
Yep, thank you.
Okay,
We'll
got
bring
you.
it back up.
Okay, so Dr. Liam, what we're going to do is like, especially with history, some people, they might like miss a point or miss an event or miss something, or maybe they like misrepresent that event or that historical facts, So what we're going to do is after we finish these sessions, we're going to cover like what was missed. So if you would like to be on that panel and like listen to what they were saying, make some notes, and then we can like next time we can say, well, this was mentioned, this was not mentioned, and it's still important in the history of Palestine. So we can cover like how do they call it, like cover all the holes like in the history.
Yeah, that might be a reasonable way to approach it, and so split the difference. Because I want people to be able to do what they want to do and approach this stuff. And I like the idea of, there's a heart right on my face. That was cute. Like really, again, like letting everybody else, approach this stuff, because everyone's going to approach it a little bit differently, and that's really kind of cool, But if you guys want me to weigh in on some of the thoughts on a different day afterwards or something, sure, I'm happy to do that. But that way, so whatever works well for y'all.
So I also want to recognize Mrs. Abdullah and Goth Dark for their massive support. I really appreciate both of you guys, and I appreciate everyone, every tap, every rose, everything that you did to support this live. You being here is a massive support for us, and I really appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you, everyone. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's a quick question, because so far we've been talking about distinct groups of people over time and how they have been moving and kind of melding into different groups. I'm trying to understand at what point those groups became Jewish people.
Well, part of them we just did. So we can easily talk about distinct groups of people that we can call Jews with the assertion of Judahite independence in the Chaldean period. So if you're looking at, again, Josiah, Hezekiah, that sort of thing, they're constructing a distinct sense of themselves politically, culturally. All of the early elements of the faith, they're already there before, but they're pulled together into a recognizable form in that period, and then it builds up steadily from there. So it really goes back into the period just before the end of the First Temple. We can start to see a distinct group of people who really would be Jewish, but the basic structure of Second Temple Judaism is largely a product of the Chaldean and Persian periods. But the core elements in terms of the identity, the sense of self, their distinctiveness, and how we can separate them from Samaritans as a distinct cultural group is emerging in that period in the late First Temple period.
So,
Got it. Thank you.
Judaism started after the Second Temple?
A recognizable form of it, like that we could really distinct, because I mean we kind of need acknowledgement of doing things like Yom Kippur and having a formalized Torah and the way that we read Torah, and the text doesn't change from that point on. That scriptural faith doesn't achieve its mature form until the early Second Temple period. But all of the core elements that go into it, minus a couple of theological concepts, are there at the very end of the First Temple. So it's building steadily over time.
So that means Judaism was formed as a religion in Palestine, because at that time it was called Palestine, and our latest, our earliest documentation of it is Herodotus, which is 550 BC.
Right. But it's a name that the Greeks gave to the southern half of it. They gave different names to the two parts of it, and what they recognize, and it's because of their interactions with coast peoples. But Judaism emerges in the hill country, and Herodotus knew dick about the hill country. Herodotus is building a lot of his stuff on like hearsay and what they understand. He never went there, didn't know that. He's using a name for it based upon the peoples that the Greeks actually interacted with along the coast. So he used Philistia to refer to the entire southern half of the Levant. So you can in that sense, but it's using an exonym. It's using what the Greeks called it in saying Palestine. But the hill country was Yisrael and Judah, and then all these different peoples along the coast would have still thought of themselves as largely Canaanite. Some of them probably would have used a term for themselves that would have been Philistine.
Yeah, but in his book, when he described the geography, he described it from Saida, which is in Lebanon, in the north of the Levant. So that means from Saida all the way to Negev, we're talking about the entire, more or less, today's Palestine.
Which is why I use the term for it, and why I've told people that Palestine as a term is quite ancient and has been applied to more than just the small section in the southwest, right, where the Philistines actually were. But it was applied to it largely as an exonym, not an endonym. So the people living in that area, stretching from Sidon and then going into the hill country, would not have self-identified as Palestinians. But
geographically it was, right?
As for an outside geographer wrote of them that way. So it really just depends on how you want to define it. Like, we can use it that way. You can definitely say the term is that old. It's applied to the whole area at that time. but it's not used as a point of identity for people who physically live there for the most part.
I
So
mean,
it's
the idea of the identity of who you are is formed way later, not at that point of history.
well, no, because people would have had a different. They would have had a different name for themselves, right? It's like the modern words that we use for a lot of things. Those are formed much later, and our modern political identities are all products of the 19th century, really. But terms of life. So somebody mentioned Phoenicians there, right? Now today we would only use Phoenicia to refer to the Lebanese coast area where, Tyre all are. But that term is an exonym. It would not have been used by the people at the time. To them, they were Knani. They weren't Phoenicians. But today, it's the only word that we can use to apply to them. So yes, that is clearly Phoenicia, and you can fairly apply the term to it at that point, but they would never have said it because they didn't speak that language or use that word. It's from Poinai. It's from a Greek word. It's entirely separate from it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think according to Herodotus himself, he came to the land.
No. Herodotus writes history the way the ancients writes history. We can't. There's some like great annotated versions, like where scholars have gone through and tied to it. Herodotus and even later, I mean, Thucydides does better, but even there are serious problems with taking it as actual histories. And Herodotus makes a lot of shit up. I mean, he's literally talking about the gods. So if we're going to take Herodotus as a source, then Athena is real. You see the problem we've got there? I mean,
but that's a thing.
A lot of shit.
His way of writing history is by talking to people. So for him,
stories, yes,
writing the history is the stories of the people, just like our oral history today, which is also considered to be part of the history if we document it later, right?
It's a bunch of oral histories, all filtered through his particular framework, what he needs to say and the story that he needs to tell, because he has a framework that he's fitting it into, and he's collecting it mostly from things that are long after the part and from people who aren't actually in these areas. He did not. Okay, so one thing that really differentiates Herodotus from Thucydides is that he goes to a lot of those sites directly and is trying to find places where maybe the stories he heard aren't actually accurate geographically. There's a lot of geographic errors in Herodotus because it's all hearsay from different people filtered through decades or centuries. None of it is from eyewitnesses to anything. He's writing about things that took place centuries earlier.
I mean, okay, I get it. A lot of people get Herodotus sometimes as mythical because he would write about things that would not make sense for today. But until today, like, we are finding things that he wrote, people just 50 years ago thought is crazy. And today we are realizing that, no, they were actually facts. Like, for example, when he wrote about the giant ants, the giant flying ants and stuff like that, which literally we found evidence that there were actually creatures that could be described as flying ants, and they were giant, but only just like this century we have found out about them. Okay, so basically we have a lot of things that he wrote about that didn't make any sense at that time, or at least like at the beginning of the last century, but today they make more sense.
I would want to see what you're pointing to, because unless you're talking about fossils of prehistoric things in the area, that wouldn't fit. Like that's like somebody seeing something in stone from millions of years earlier and making it up as if it really existed in the world. There's plenty of that shit. That's why, like, dragons exist in the Bible, because there are weird shit that we find and dig up, and we have to give them a meaning. We have to apply meaning to it. It doesn't mean that there's an event using those kind of, like, flying ants, because that clearly can't have happened in the period that he's talking about. So it honestly is a way that you can, again, your example better supports the way that I'm talking about how to read Herodotus. He's not actually talking about an event that could have possibly taken place in the period of the Persian Wars. Again, a lot of the stuff, it's external hearsay. A lot of it is useful. It is an old document. We do use it. We absolutely use Herodotus for a lot of good things. But the narratives that he's constructed there aren't historical events, and it's all written from a particular perspective for a particular people, which means the terms, the names used are their names in their language, and not the names that people would have used in their own records. The way that you do that is we have to look at the region, who's writing in that area, and what are they writing and calling themselves. And we know that the people living in Sidon did not call themselves Puinai, because they didn't speak Greek.
Yeah, I just want to say, Goldie, I'm gonna bring you up. Okay, I need to bring up someone for a question. They have been
Oh,
very
no,
patient.
you can drop me. I'm done. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Be
I
blessed.
was just DMing you that just to drop me because I'm just gonna make the shirts. And so drop me. I'll be in the comments. If you need me, pull me back up anytime.
You need the sizes first, Goldie.
Yes,
who
I do. Yes,
donated.
what I mean is I'm printing out all the material and then I'll put it on the shirts when I get the sizes. But I'm printing out like the words and the triangles and all that stuff.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay?
Okay, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Love you too.
Hello guys.
Hello.
Oh, Mr. Dr. Liam. Actually, the reason I requested was because if you remember, on Friday you had your own live, and I actually forgot my question, but actually I remember it just now. And the question was, what part or parts of Palestinian history have been attacked or hidden by the state of Israel and manipulated?
Most of it. A lot of Israeli narratives about, especially their ancient past, are largely drawn from biblical sources. So they lean a lot on the whole Joshua narratives of conquest and the right of rule through conquest, and the united monarchy, and controlling the entire territory centrally, and that it was all Jewish. And yeah, they draw a lot on that. But even in more recent history, when one of the really perverse factors of the Nakba was, not only did they destroy tons of villages and works and whatnot, but they actually incorporated a bunch of them into national parks and forests, and they labeled things that were only built in like the 18th century by Palestinians and said these are ancient ruins and ancient remains, and it just left a lot of the context out. It's sort of like erasing the long history of people who still live there and folding it into their mythological understanding of it, always just waiting for them to come back. There's within their own internal state narratives, there's a lot of modern mythologizing for sure.
Oh, of course. I'm just gonna expand more on that. So the Israeli narrative goes, they are for some reason really obsessed with the Arab extensions of the 7th century. So the Israeli narrative goes that the Rashidun Caliphate, so to say, invaded, and then there was a population. They got rid of the Jews. They got replaced with Arab settlers, and then
Okay, wow, excuse me. I need to stop you here. So this is like a prepared
I
like
know.
a sentence.
I don't believe it.
I
I'm just saying it.
so that we're going down there. So when we go to this topic,
Next
you
week.
can ask the
Next week.
question next
Okay,
week.
okay. I have
Yeah,
a.
next week is the perfect
I'll
time for
talk
this
about
stuff.
Herodotus.
Yeah.
I'll talk about Herodotus instead. We can leave the modern history for the next live on Saturday. So the thing about Herodotus is, Salah ad-Din brought it up. There's another account from Herodotus that stated, I think it's from 400 BC or something. Don't quote me on that. It's somewhere from that time that he claims that in Gaza, and not necessarily the entire state of Palestine, but especially Gaza, had a population of Arab-speaking people. That's what it says, and an Arab-speaking village. So that is one of the accounts. The thing is, many Zionists, whenever they hear the word Herodotus, they immediately say, "Oh, he's a well-known fabricator from history," stuff like that. So, what would you think of that?
There is a okay. So if we're thinking about the long-term cultural and biological history of Palestine, you can actually see some genetic variation between the north and the south part. And the southern parts of Palestine do have more admixture from populations that we see in northern Arabia, because they're neighbors, and neighbors tend to intermarry, and people who intermarry produce kids. So there would be peoples in the ancient world that we could kind of identify as ancient Arabs. The language they would have spoken would not have been really recognizable to us yet. It's still evolving. It's a distinct Semitic language in the region, but the portions of northwest Arabia and where portions of today where Jordan are were historically connected to Palestine because they're close neighbors and they intermarried and they shared elements. So that's partly accurate in a way. But we would make some mistakes too if we took that and read it as like Arabs that we would recognize lived in that area. The Romans also talked about Arabs in the area. One Roman province in the area was literally called Arabia Petraea, you know?
Exactly.
Arabia Felix. You know, they had like two provinces with Arabia in the name in the Roman Empire because there were people you could identify as Arabs in the area already. But culturally, linguistically, they're not like the people that we identify from the Quranic period yet, because it's hundreds of years earlier. Again, it's sort of like there's a huge distinction between the way people spoke at the time Beowulf is written by the Saxons and now, you know, languages, cultures change over time. So it's an earlier stage in the development of what we could recognize as later Arabs, for sure. So, yes.
Yeah, I
Guys,
think
can you
that
poll?
makes.
Can everyone? Okay, give me 1 second. Can everyone do the poll, guys? It's the blue and white clipboard there. Please do it.
Oh,
Okay. Actually, it makes a sense in a way. It makes sense in a way because Arabs definitely were centuries before Islam, centuries, and that is proven. That's proven through the Ghassanis, for example, and the early Christians in the land. They also were Arabs. We're talking about the Nabateans. Also, they had their cities in Palestine. They had cities. The Nabateans also spoke Arabic, and they had. Yes, I mean
it's related to It's
exactly.
It's a branch from, and it evolved into some. Even by the time of the Quranic age, it evolved into a form that was quite distinct from. But it is on the continuum that would create the Arabic language for sure.
Exactly, and that's why, for example, the earliest name of the Nabateans was Ar-Rahmaniyun. Ar-Rahmaniyun, the mercifulest. Ar-Rahmaniyun is the followers of Ar-Rahman. Ar-Rahman is one of the names of God in Islam, which probably is derived from that as well, from the understanding of the Arabs of God in Nabatea. And the earliest scriptures we found of written scriptures of the Nabateans is as early as about 200 BC. Or 300 BC, which means we're talking about a way earlier. And since they were connected and they were in control, because the Nabateans always loved to have full control over the Silk Road, they had established settlements for them in Palestine. So that's probably could be the connection between Arabs and Arabism, or Arabic language and culture, and Palestine, the earliest ones.
Sure, yeah. There again is a clear connection there.
Yeah.
But one of the things that you want to note, and I tried to make a side reference much earlier on. Realistically, there is, if you look at the habitable areas, because again, you're surrounded by tons of mountains and deserts and whatnot, all down the Hejaz into Yemen, there's a habitable region that you can interact with. And that has gone on since the Stone Age. This is why Yemenites have DNA closely connected to Natufians, right? Because there's movement back and forth throughout the Hejaz. And in the long run, this is why the Semitic languages that'll become Arabic and the South Arabian languages all develop. Because there are Semitic speakers throughout this whole broad region that's habitable in this area. So yeah, there's always been that kind of historical mixing and moving around of people.
Actually, that's exactly how Yemenis or Southern Arabic or Arabians adopted the Canaanite earlier alphabet, because if you look and check the earliest ways of Southern Arabic language, it has totally different alphabet. You cannot read it, but then it developed completely from the alphabet, the early Canaanite alphabet, which is called the old Jewish alphabet, basically, which is the same as Canaanite.
Right.
Simply from there, and we have the origin very, very clear, that was found on a tablet in Gaza, for instance.
There's a lot of fun stories about the development of the writing systems over time. The writing systems that will become, Hebrew and Aramaic and whatnot, and ultimately lead to the creation of Arabic, they really start with the Proto-Sinaitic, which is a kind of shorthand from Egyptian. So it's where you've got Egyptian colonies in the Sinai for, mining lapis lazuli and shit like that. And they need like a simple form of symbols and signs. So they develop a writing system for that moves into the Levant, and the Levant, it develops into what we can call the Canaanite, Phoenician, or Paleo-Hebrew. So Paleo-Hebrew, Canaanite, and Phoenician, they're the same script, right? It's the mature form of what evolved out of that Proto-Sinaitic. And then that, in turn, evolves into tons of other scripts. The later Aramaic script, which is actually what we call today the Hebrew script, is a particular form of Aramaic that ends up being used widely in the Assyrian and Chaldean empires. Out of that later develops Syriac, but also the Nabatean script. The Nabatean script and Syriac both evolve out of Aramaic, which evolves out of the earlier Canaanite script. And then Arabic, the Arabic script there, draws heavily from Nabatean and Syriac forms. It combines elements of both of those scripts. So it has characters that look a little bit like both, and it creates its own distinct form. But the writing systems are all ultimately interconnected because they're all these different Semitic speakers intermingling and moving, and writing systems change over time. I mean, hell, there are a number of letters that used to be used in the English language that aren't anymore. Scripts always change over centuries.
Guys, anybody has any more questions? If yes, please write them in the chat or send them.
I was just going to ask about the Nabatean script, and I think Liam already answered it, as usual.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was talking about my trip to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and you can see the script. They compared the Nabatean script, and it's a really nice exhibit if anyone goes to New York. How to compare the Nabatean script and how the Arabic script derives out of it, and as you said, 4 bars from Syriac and originally coming, derived from Aramaic, and exactly as you said, I was just gonna come here and comment on that, but you trumped me on.
For me, Nabatean is readable. I can read it just from knowing Arabic, because if you know different calligraphies of Arabic, you can easily read Nabatean. Because today it's used as a calligraphy.
It's a bit of a stretch.
If you know the later Aramaic forms or the Hebrew script today, you can actually make sense of the Paleo-Hebrew script because the letters just change form over time. The way that we write them shifts, but you can still recognize, oh yeah, that evolved into the Gimel. Oh yeah, that evolved into you. So yeah, absolutely, I can very easily read Paleo-Hebrew script out from knowing the modern Hebrew script, but they look at the surface at a glance completely different.
But I just want to ask real quickly, Liam. So during like the Neo-Assyrian period, is it true like Aramaic was just the language of like the leading classes before it spread through?
Yeah, so it's not one that I went into. So there's a distinct population we call the Arameans, who are connected to some of the other broader long-term development of different Semitic cultures, but we can't properly call them Canaanite. There are some distinct cultural differences. They're centered on the area around where Damascus is today. The Arameans are a trading people, a merchant people. They have a very short-lived independent history, like so many other states in the area. They don't last long because they get absorbed into larger empires. But because they were merchants and their language spread to other people, not just a ruling class, this is why in the Assyrian and Chaldean periods, they decided to make that the lingua franca. and shift records to that, because there were already people who knew how to read it, and you could build a broader literate class that way by using an existing script and language. So it does spread quite widely. In all ancient cultures, only particular elements of the ruling and tribal classes were literate. Most people could never read a damn thing. But the languages were still spread over wide areas because the literate classes in different areas would adopt the same basic system. It's similar to the way that, for example, cuneiform spread earlier from the Sumerians to the Akkadians, and then the early Persians adopted it. So all of our earliest Persian records from the Achaemenid period are literally in cuneiform.
Right.
Just to adopt a writing system. Aramaic spreads for the same basic reason. It's useful because there are already people in the area who know it, and those empires, starting in the Neo-Assyrian period, they adopted and spread it more widely.
Right. Right, but when the Seleucids came and brought Greek as the administrative language, you saw Aramaic being more isolated. You saw these local, really local Aramaic dialects, like how developing, and we don't know which local Aramaic dialect then contributed to the Nabatean script, essentially, or the Nabatean language, because for example, there are different effects of the Greek language itself on the local dialects themselves, and they kind of became isolated because they weren't using Aramaic as an administrative language. So only communities like speaking Aramaic were isolated, and they developed very diverse dialects.
Sure, but all throughout the Greek period, there are people making extensive use of it for their own purposes and for religious purposes. This is why the so-called Hebrew script is standardized at this point. It's why Torah is written the way it is, because they adopted that Middle Aramaic script, and it was in wide use all through the Greek and Roman periods. So they would have had plenty of examples in the interior to draw from to build the Nabatean without dealing with the Greeks. The Greeks administered things in their own language, but people continued to use the Aramaic script and the Aramaic spoken language all through Palestine throughout the entire Greek and Roman period.
I have a question actually about this. When was Hebrew known as Hebrew?
Well, really from the construction of these specific texts, when you start putting this stuff together and finalizing Torah and whatnot and creating a distinct, Israelite identity that's centered on it, and
so
then
it was known back then as Hebrew language?
Well, Ivrit, but not, but yeah. I mean, Hebrew is an exonym. It's not a word Hebrew isn't a word.
I know. I mean, Ivrit.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, the word already exists for it.
And it wasn't a name. It wasn't the name of a different language at that time. Like, because the old Hebrew language is literally the Aramaic and the old Canaanite language.
It's not Aramaic. Aramaic is a different related Semitic language that later got adopted by Jews because of the exile and taken on there. It became a common spoken language because of the exile period and the later Assyrian and Chaldean administration, and then becomes an important written language for them and goes into Talmud and everything else. But it was never earlier on the spoken language. It was a language of the Aramaeans far to the north. Hebrew evolved alongside Moabite and Edomite and the other languages in the area from a broader common Canaanite Semitic language. So there are different dialects of a distinct Semitic language. So if you go back far enough, we can still refer to like Hebrews as a whole, collectively referring to all of those different distinct dialects. Because Edomite would have been very closely related, but still a bit different. Kind of like there's like a whole bunch of different, like, very close to Germany. So like, I don't know, Bavarian is different from, Thuringian or whatever. Like, it's more like that. We can use Hebrew as a generic term for all of those as a language grouping within the broader Semitic language family.
Because I've heard this theory. I'm not sure how accurate it is, that the name Hebrew was given to the dialect of the people who were traveling through the desert. And from there, it got its name, because the Hebrew comes from the word abiru or habiru, and it literally means the passengers or the travelers. Or al-abirun in Arabic. and in Hebrew as well, the same thing. So basically, it could have been the accent of the people who moved from one place to another through the desert, and since there is also a mythological history behind it of Abraham being a Abir, who crossed the desert literally from Haran all the way to Palestine, considering him the first Hebrew or the first Abir, and later on adopting his people or the people that believed he was their founding father, and then basically whatever language they spoke with their accent was given that name at that time.
Okay, so I think I'm not sure then I got the initial part of the question. The languages as they develop, right, are recognizable. We can talk about a broader spectrum of Hebrew languages. And oh my gosh, you got another one, Muhammad I think you got another one of those weird roles here.
Guys, anybody has the okay, thank you.
But what you call it, it's hard to know where exactly that showed up. It's debated. And we really would have no idea what people would have called their language if you go back into like the Edomite, Moabite periods, when you go back to the development of the Hebrew language. But the language itself, as a distinct spoken form, we know where it's developing and how it starts to distinguish itself from its neighbors. But yeah, I'm not sure I have an opinion as to when exactly it took on a specific name for it. But I know that by the time we're in the period that I'm going to be talking about last, that name is in use. But its ultimate origins, I'm not sure.
Okay. I think we should continue now for like enough with the questions.
Different. Yiddish is a form of medieval High German. It's written in the same Aramaic script, but it's a completely different language and language family that evolves along the Rhine River Valley.
Ooh, yeah.
I
want to talk so much about Yiddish with you. There's so many Iranian loanwords and so many Persian loanwords coming from the Caucasus. Got so much to talk about this with you later, though.
Yeah, it's because again, Jews travel all over the place, so you pick up tons of influences, and Jews scattered.
Well,
all
the same
across
guy with David Reich,
we were
the
talking about.
geneticist that I was telling you about. David Reich, the geneticist I was telling you about, who works with linguists. It's amazing work. I'll tell you about it later, though.
Cool. Yeah, I look forward to that. We were just talking about the Persian imperial period, the Achaemenid dynasty. It's really from that period on the Jews start scattering into Iran and Central Asia. So some of those communities are very old. Ooh, there's a cheering sound. That's neat. Okay, so where are we? Was there any other thoughts, questions, anything we had to resolve, or where are we at? Oh, it went totally silent. Where is everybody?
No, I think
I'm working on the poll. I'm so sorry. I was like typing so fast. Okay, guys, take the poll, and yeah, I think we are ready to move on to the next subject. I believe that we got all of the questions, and okay, so I see that we have 141 people in the viewers, 137 all of a sudden. Drop any comment, anything, any positive word to Dr. Liam. Thank him for the very valuable information that we got today. And so it's like you proving your presence now. Just drop anything in the comments. I want to see a lot of comments coming in. And if you can see the subscription goal, I'm 7 people away. If you can subscribe even for 1 month, just let me achieve that goal. I would really appreciate it. Thank you.